If you're anything like me, there's a very high chance you're a big fan of giant robots or mecha, and Xenoblade X is one of those games that allows us to live out dreams of piloting these giant robots. Skells are one of the major draws of Xenoblade X, featuring a few completely unique mechanics compared to ground combat, and having some different strengths as well that you can take advantage of, and in this video I want to show you a lot about how to do exactly that. The promised Skell guide is finally here, and while I didn't exactly get the chance to finish preparation to show off something like max damage Zenith Cannon, I think the general principles in this guide should still be useful to everyone as far as how Skell combat works, the differences to ground combat, Skell customization, and some other important information you may want to know related to Skells. If you enjoy guide content on Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition and would love to see more, please do be sure to subscribe to the channel because it would help me out so much and I would love you forever. I still have weapon guides, probably a ticket farming guide, and some other things planned, so please do look forward to that. I'm fairly close to hitting 100,000 subscribers and would really love to hit that milestone soon. Let's get into it. As some very general information, you can first obtain a Skell at the end of Chapter 6, simply by completing a series of side quests that you can obtain in the Blade Barracks from Vandom. All of these side quests are fairly simple to complete, especially with item tracking added into this game, and then you will be given a level 20 Skell upon completion. It will not come with any weapons, so you may need to buy some weapons from the shop if you would like to use this level 20 Skell, but alternatively, if you are close to level 30, you can buy a different Skell frame from one of the Skells series in the shop. Each of the stats you see is functionally identical to stats you can use on the ground. The major difference is that the armor stat will replace the defense stat. This still functions as flat reduction, and I know you heard me in the past say that defense is a really bad stat, but the values are much higher for Skells, meaning that you can likely get more actual benefit out of the stat now compared to ground defense. Whereas with ground, you could still be taking easily like 2,800 damage if you're taking a 3,000 damage hit and only had 200 defense. With Skell armor, you will likely have a much higher reduction value, meaning this can actually be a more useful stat just in general. Obviously, this is still not as good as the resistances you see at the bottom right of the screen, because this is going to be just flat damage reduction against that type of damage type, and it is pretty simple to actually hit 100% resistance for the type of damage that you want to hit if you know how to build your Skell. So that is something that you can keep in mind as well, and that is going to be generally more useful than defense overall, but defense is still, or the armor stat is at least a bit more useful this time around. GP has replaced TP, but it works almost exactly the same, existing to activate the Skell overdrive, and it doesn't really do anything else in this case. It can be attained from auto-attacking with Skells and from hitting soul voices and going into cockpit mode, which we will discuss later. Additionally, the potential stat is significantly worse for Skells because there is no TP arts that get boosted by them. Only soul voice healing and healing arts even use the Skell potential stat, meaning it is functionally not very useful for Skells at all. All other stats like resistances are still very useful, and melee attack and ranged attack are going to be the core stats that boost your damage depending on the arts you are using. The Skells in each of these different series have different strengths and weaknesses, usually with one ranged attack focus and one melee attack focus Skell of the three different weight classes of light, medium, and heavy. You also have a couple new Skells like the Face Valve, which seems to be more evasion focused. As for general differences, light Skells have a big focus on higher evasion, but they have lower sustained combat and flight fuel consumption. Since you don't have something like Ghostwalker for Skells, evasion on Skells isn't exactly a terrible stat that you can invest into, so light Skells can have some use because of that. But regardless, they are going to be the generally weakest as far as actual maximum damage potential, so that is one thing to keep in mind. The medium Skells have a maximum limit of 6,000 GP, so it is easier to activate Overdrive and use Overdrive during fights more. That is one of the biggest benefits of the medium types of Skells. Otherwise, the rest of the stats are definitely going to be middle of the pack compared to the light and heavy Skells, so it really just depends on what you are going for if you want a more jack-of-all-trade type of Skell. These are not bad Skells either, and the Lila in particular is considered one of the better post-game Skells with its maximum potential. And then we have the heavy Skells. These have the highest armor and much higher HP than other types of Skells, and they will generally have higher values for melee and ranged attack depending. They are definitely less fuel efficient though, and they also are a bit slower, and they also cost a lot more money, so that is something that you may want to keep in mind when you are considering these Skells. But regardless, they do have a higher potential for maximum tanking ability, although the evasion stat is still not the best, so that is not going to be something to rely on compared to the lighter Skells. As far as what is the best Skell, there isn't really a best answer for the general Skells. You can experiment with your own playstyle and what you like, especially early on in the game. As long as you are following general principles, you should be fine. Mastema has the highest ranged attack, which is usually a more useful stat than melee attack, but it's also a heavy Skell, so it has some weaknesses because of that. The Amdusias, similarly, has the highest melee attack. This is not to say you can't run melee weapons on ranged Skells or ranged weapons on melee Skells either. General attack is very low, especially for level 30 Skells, so typically your weapons and their attack is going to matter much more at that level, and you may want to focus on the other aspects of the Skell like max health, armor, and obviously resistances. And maybe just how they drive and how much fuel they have as well if you care about stuff like that outside of combat, which honestly I kind of do sometimes. Typically, as far as shop weapons are concerned, the highest damage weapon for melee is going to be the G-Buster, and Phoenix is probably going to be the best weapon for ranged Skells. Each Skell has stronger versions in the series, one of which is the level 50 versions unlocked by getting Sakuraba to level 5, and the level 60 versions, which are craftable versions of the Skells with the highest stats all around. Additionally, at level 60, after beating Chapter 12, you can craft the Ares 90 Skell, which is one of the easiest and generally super useful Skells in the entire game. It does not have the same maximum potential as other level 60 Skells might, but it is significantly better right out of the box and doesn't take too much to still do a lot of damage. We can talk a bit more about that in the customization section. For now, let's move on to general Skell combat. So once again, a lot of the battle systems are functionally identical to ground combat here. Simply target an enemy in the overworld with your Skell and you can attack it with your equipped weapon. Similarly, you can press the X button to swap weapons to get a bit more efficiency out of your auto attacks. A lot of the other same general principles are going to apply here, just like in my original Xenoblade X combat guide, where your morale will increase as you land soul voices, and the higher your morale is, the more soul voices you are going to get. In the Skells in particular, unless you are running a specific healing art, which is based on your potential stat, soul voices are probably going to be your main way to heal. Now, I do not recommend running really high potential, as you should be fine if you are inside your Skell without really having to worry about your maximum health that much, but regardless, it is something to keep in mind. But essentially, if you are using soul voices, your soul voices are going to be basically the exact same as your ground combat soul voices, so you can just kind of change everything based on that, or just kind of leave them the same if you want to. It doesn't really matter too much. If a soul voice is triggered, you will see a QTE prompt, and if you hit this button challenge, your morale level is going to rise, and your character will shout some advice to party members. All of your party members are able to trigger that soul voice by using an art of the corresponding type. This can be damage increases, higher buff tiers, or even better HP recovery. It really just depends on the art and the effect. You can even get higher debuff tiers, which is one of the best things to do with some of these Skell effects that you can have. Soul voices are a pretty key aspect to combat to do as much damage as possible, especially inside of Skells where you have some really powerful weapons on certain arts that you might want to take advantage of soul voices to get the most benefit out of them, since they have much higher cooldowns inside of Skells. So that is just something to keep in mind as well. Your arts this time around aren't tied to classes or anything like that. You don't even have skills that affect Skells. Your Skell arts are specifically the weapons you have equipped. So there are a bunch of potential weapon slots on your Skell, and you can equip up to 8 of these, and these are going to be the 8 arts that you have available to you on your Skell. Typically, you can only equip a really strong weapon to 1 or 2 of these slots, and other effects of the arts are just going to be generally useful support capabilities or weaker damaging arts, so it really just depends. Typically, your arts are going to have varied cooldowns with Skells, with your really strong weapons that you equip on your Skell having much higher cooldowns. Stuff like G-Buster, Phoenix, and especially your really strong post-game super weapons are going to have very significantly higher cooldowns, even north of 1 to 2 minutes at times, so that can be something to keep in mind. Different to ground combat is that there is no secondary and tertiary cooldowns possible for Skells. What you see is what you get, so that can make things a little bit simpler at times. That said, there is a way to kind of take advantage of your really strong arts and use them more often, and that is going to be cockpit mode. So essentially, 10% of the time when you use any of your arts, you can activate cockpit mode, where the camera will basically zoom in as if you were looking out from the cockpit of the Skell, and all of your arts will instantly recharge. After waiting a bit, you can use one of your arts again, and then you will be out of cockpit mode and be allowed to use all of your other arts after that. Now, 10% obviously isn't exactly a super high chance, but there are some things you can do to increase your chances of getting cockpit mode more often. Particularly if you want to spam your really strong weapon more often, you might want to run a bunch of really low cooldown arts in the other slots that you are able to spam more often to get higher chances of triggering that 10%. Which means you can get more cockpit modes, which means you can use your strong attack more often, and end Skell combat fights faster by being allowed to use your strongest weapon. Additionally, while in cockpit time or cockpit mode, you will gain 500 GP, which means you can activate overdrive much easier after that. You will also be completely invincible to damage while in cockpit mode, so triggering this at a really good time can be very, very helpful. There isn't really too much else to say about cockpit mode. It's just a very nice, useful mechanic to be aware of, and can be really helpful to take advantage of if you have a lot of lower cooldown weapons. One of the other major differences of Skell combat is that Skell Overdrive is entirely different to Ground Overdrive, and it is significantly less complicated. You will need 3000 GP to activate Overdrive, similar to TP needing 3000 to activate on foot, but outside of that, there is a lot more simple mechanics this time around. So, Skell Overdrive, I believe, still only lasts 15 seconds, and it can be extended, but there's a chance to extend this time. The base chance of the extension is 100% for the first time, 100% for the second time, 50% for the third time, 0% for the fourth time, and 0% for the fifth time, and it can be extended to a maximum of 5 times. Now, those are the base chance of extension values, and you can do things to increase those further, which is why those last two values are 0%, since you do have ways of increasing the extension chance further by doing that. While Skell Overdrive is active, you will consume 0 fuel with anything you do, which can be very useful if you have really strong super weapons on your Skells that take a lot of fuel. It will also increase the chance of cockpit time, alternating between 30% for odd rounds of your Overdrive extension and 20% for even rounds. Each cockpit time extends the chance of Overdrive extension by 20% as well. So there are ways that they just kind of build upon each other and build upon themselves. So it can be very beneficial to have those low cooldown arts again, so you can use them even more often. In this way, cockpit time and Skell Overdrive kind of work hand in hand to kind of take extra benefit out of each other. 3000 GP will be consumed at the end of Skell Overdrive, and there's no way to infinitely extend it like Ground Overdrive, so that's something to keep in mind. The Overdrive extension is pretty much just tied to what we just talked about. Additionally, each Skell series has different Overdrive effects. So depending on the type of Skell you have, your Overdrive might have different effects on them. This is usually listed on the page for the Skell itself, and this can have a number of pretty useful effects like melee and ranged attack up, cooldown boost, and just dealing more damage in general. So it really just depends on the type of Skell. There aren't too many other notable major differences between Skell and ground combat in this game. Overall, I think Skell combat is actually a little bit easier since there's only one cooldown to keep track of, and a lot of it is just pressing the strong button at the right time as soon as it is off cooldown, and just using your other slots to make sure you can press that strong button as much as possible. As much as I do like giant mechs, I do think it can be a little bit less fun compared to ground combat, but you can swap between Skell and ground combat anytime by pressing ZL during combat. You can get out of your Skell after maybe using your strong weapons, and then go into ground combat immediately afterwards if you would like to do that. Or if you just kind of mess up ground combat in some way, you're out of TP, can't use Overdrive, you can get into your Skell and kind of have that as a backup plan. So really, however you want to approach combat, you have that ability to do so. Now, Skells obviously can't go inside of small caves, so that's the one limitation. You're not going to be able to use them there at all. But outside of that, Skells can pretty much be used for pretty much all other content in the game. So with all that out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about Skell customization now. So you have 3 ways to customize your Skell. You have obviously your Skell weapons, which are fully customizable. You have your Skell armor, which is also pretty customizable. You can change your armor out for other parts pretty much on everything you want, except for very special Skells that you can't change. Then you have the Skell frame, which cannot be changed, but you can add augments to your Skell frame, which can be nice to have, and do have some unique effects as well, which can boost the power of your Skell a lot. Alright, so we do need to have a quick talk about Skells. They do not have the same potential as ground combat. They cannot reach the same damage numbers as ground combat. The maximum damage a Skell can reach is only 10 million. The reason for this is because secondary and tertiary cooldowns actually increase the damage cap up to 40 million, and Core Crusher can increase the damage cap up to 99 million, basically. So there is essentially no world where Skells are ever going to hit the exact same maximum damage potential that ground combat can, no matter what you do. Now, there is some good news in the fact that it is possible to build Skells to still basically one-shot all normal enemies in the entire game. Obviously, it's never going to be as optimal for something like a Nemesis, which has so many HP bars, but if you're just flying around the world of Mira, pretty much any enemy can go down to Skells, especially if you really invest heavily in the super weapons and are really willing to put in the work to customize your Skell. One of the best super weapons is just going to be the Zenith Cannon. I think this one is particularly useful just because of the fact that it can ignore attribute resistance, and that allows you to basically build it to one-shot everything in the game except for something that has more than 10 million HP, which is only a few enemies in the entire world. The strongest version of the Zenith Cannon is obtained by completing L's last affinity mission, and then you can craft it at the AM terminal. Just simply go to Develop New Gear, Skell Weapons, and you will see the Zenith Cannon there. Now, the thing about crafting strong super weapons like this is that they are going to be expensive, and that is something you're going to keep in mind. You're probably going to want either tickets or you're going to want to go farm these. I just learned a method that makes tickets a lot easier to get, and that is just going to be scouting. Scouting actually allows you to get tickets very, very easily, especially if you scout really high level Skells and then level them up to Blade level 3 before releasing them. And if you're able to do this, you can get a massive amount of tickets per each blade that you scout, over 500 per each. It is really, really useful, especially if you combine this with doing the affinity missions, not the affinity missions, the active missions in the Blade Barracks. You will get a bunch of tickets every time you complete these as well. If you take these scouts with you, you can kind of multitask getting tickets while doing this at the same time. I will probably make a more generally larger guide about this as well, so other players are aware that don't click on the Skell guide or don't make it this far into the Skell guide video, but I'll explain it in more detail then. But regardless, tickets are one of the easiest things to farm in this game if you know what you're doing with scouting and doing the active missions in the Blade Barracks, which means you can buy everything very, very easily. Now, once you have your Skell super weapon, something like a Zenith Cannon here, the best way to increase the attack power of it is going to be able to put these custom weapon attack power mods on it. This will increase the attack of the weapon they are currently equipped to, and then outside of that, on every one of your other 8 slots, or your other slots that you have on your weapon, including your auto attack weapons, you are able to equip more augments. And these augments can be useful for boosting the general damage and power of your Skell. Stuff like opening art, stuff like ranged attack up, stuff like, well, Ultra Fauna Slayer up if you're targeting a specific Ultra Fauna type enemy like Telethia. There are a lot of things you can do here. The major negative is just the fact that this is very, very expensive. Even with 3 weapon attack power customs on my Zenith Cannon, even with some ranged attack power-ups and with some opening arts, I still was only hitting about 500,000. Now, you can boost this all the way to 9 million or 10 million, like I said, but it is very expensive and very difficult to do, and it takes a while to do that. Now, one other thing that to keep in mind is that there are augments you can equip on your character itself to boost the damage of your Skell. The Skell Drive augments that I did not really consider useful for ground combat actually do have some use if you do plan to fight in your Skell. You can boost the stats of your Skell or fuel recovery or fuel efficiency if you equip these types of augments, and there is specific gear that you can also use to increase the stats of your Skell as well. So if you really want to fight in your Skell, you're going to be able to outfit yourself using a lot of these specific Skell-based augments, even with ground combat, to do this. That said, pretty much all of these really customizable Skells are really, really expensive for significantly less payoff than ground combat. I know it kind of sucks because using their big robot is cool, but that is just something you are going to have to keep in mind and something to remember when you are considering your builds. That's one of the big reasons I focused really heavily on ground combat in the first week, and it's one of the major reasons I still wasn't really able to get a ton of optimization for this to show you really big damage numbers with the Skell. Regardless, that is something you are going to have to keep in mind. Now, that said, there does exist a very specialized Skell that you can buy called the Ares 90. I've already mentioned this in a previous video, but this is a really strong Skell out of the box. You can very, very easily equipping your weapon attack powers on your Agastra cannon on the Ares 90, along with some ranged attack ups and some opening arts ups, and you can get a lot of damage out of this that still allows you to one-shot most things in the game for basically the same amount of fuel. And honestly, this is much easier to do, it is much cheaper, and while it isn't as cool as customizing your own Skell, I still think it is very, very useful to just be able to do this. And it is something basically all players should probably just kind of build towards before they try to get really, really hyper-optimal Skells, or even hyper-optimal ground combat builds, since it helps with farming so much too. But yes, every single Skell weapon can have up to 3 slots on it, meaning you can get a lot of augments out of this. Your Skell armor has augments on all of the parts. You have augments on your Skell frame. There are a lot of ways you can customize your Skell basically to do basically whatever you need. If you want to break appendages really fast, you can make a break Skell that focuses on crush break appendage augments. If you want to have a Skell that extends a debuff duration for 8 minutes, you can do that, as I have done in the past. If you are willing to grind out the materials, there's basically an infinite amount of things you can do with Skells, and you can make yourself really powerful with Skells. So that is something really, really nice to have, and something really nice that you can consider doing. But it is very expensive. I do recommend focusing on ground combat first. There is a chance that I do make a video just focusing on all of the different types of Skell augments, but this video is already getting pretty long already, and I don't want to be here until like the 50-minute mark, given how many Skell augments there are and all these stuff that you can possibly do with them. So I think for a general overview Skell guide and just how to use it and about general basic customization features, I think this is probably going to be good enough. As one last note, I will say that the disc bomb glitch was fixed in this game, so it is not nearly as broken as it used to be, so that might be something to keep in mind as well if you're wondering why I did not bother to mention it. It has been fixed. It is not nearly as broken as it was before, but it is still a pretty good option to consider. If you would like to see more information about Skells in the future, including all of the augments and all of the hyper-specific customization you can do, once I have more time to do that and can have some really good builds, I would be happy to show that to you, so please let me know in the comments. And if you did enjoy the video and did learn something, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with your friends who are new to the game, especially if they are close to getting a Skell, so they can just have a general idea of how Skells work and get the most benefit out of them. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, have a wonderful and blessed day, and hopefully I will see you back here soon.